No one else knew what to do with it. I didn't know what to do with it either, but I was interested. I think in my first year of business, I think I earned, maybe 10 grand. And I was, so I had to pay the rent and everything with that money. And from there, we were able to get it across to Channel 10 and Channel 7. This little village never had cinema, like in the community space, and we were showing them cinema with themselves in it.
That's pretty amazing.
Welcome to Not the Rob Bell Podcast, where we talk with business owners, marketers and professionals to extract what makes people and businesses successful.
Hey everyone, and thanks for tuning in to Not the Rob Bell Podcast. Today's guest, I've got Tim Robinson. We talk to him about following your passions and pitching great ideas to major TV networks. It's coming up now. Thanks so much, Tim, for joining us on the podcast. It's really great to have you here.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. Or there, as we're still getting used to this whole talking remotely thing, aren't we?
Indeed, exactly.
No, it's all good. So the reason that we wanted to have a bit of a chat is you actually have your own TV show that
right.
you produce called Snap Happy the Photography Show, which is on Channel 10 and now in its 5th season or 5 seasons completed?
We've just completed our 5th season and we were about to kick off on the 6th and COVID-19 happened.
No, that's cool. We'll circle back to the show in a little bit, but what I'd really love to know about is just a little bit of your history and how you got into TV. I understand you did some training and that sort of thing. Can you give us a bit of a rundown on the history of Tim Robinson?
Sure, the brief history of Tim Robinson. Well, I've always kind of known that I wanted to be in TV, and I think that started from an early age with my dad doing a stint in television. So I was around a bit of production here and there, and at the time, the school I went to was a new school. It was a technology high school. Panasonic donated 2 cameras and an edit suite, and no one else knew what to do with it. I didn't know what to do with it either, but I was interested, and the AV guy gave me a key to the room. So I was in there every second afternoon, working on little videos and whatnot. So from there, I just kind of had it in my head that that's what I was going to do. And out of school, studied, got an entry-level job at Channel 7, was there for about 5 years until I decided it was time to go freelance.
Cool. So in those early days, obviously, when you were mucking around in the editing suite, they probably had no real hard intentions or anything like that, but how pivotal were they for sort of setting you on this course?
Yeah, look, really pivotal. I mean, I think just having those opportunities, I think early on really cemented that for me, and having someone other than family that was doing it. At school, there was a guy who, he was an English teacher, but he was really passionate about making videos. So we did a lot of video production as part of our English studies and that kind of thing. And we won an award with our first film that we did. So that was something like that. Acknowledgement early on really gave me that kind of drive to pursue it a little bit more. So I think it was really pivotal. That's really the beginning of my journey that kind of hasn't stopped.
Because, you're really a storyteller at heart, I can tell. And was it sort of more on the technical side that you were picking up on early on, or was it really just unleashing that storytelling ability that you've got?
Yeah, look, it total both. I'm a massive nerd. I love technical stuff. Always been into film and drama and video and theatre and things like that. So I do enjoy a good story. I like telling a story, but I also love the technical stuff. Like I've got, that's just a small collection of my cameras sitting up there. I tend to hoard things and I just enjoy the technology and enjoy experiencing that, but obviously telling the stories as well. I love writing and that kind of thing as well.
And because the technology is just so instrumental to bringing out that creativity as well. When I was a boy, we used to edit on VHS and we'd press pause and, had an old analog switcher to try and muck around with things as well. But how much has technology enabled you to, bring that out?
Oh, big time, man. I mean, things have changed so much. When I made my first little, film, that was in 1992. And like you say, I think we were using a VHS-C camera and then cutting reel to reel. And, the challenges were that there wasn't stuff at your fingertips like there is now. I mean, now, this is a very capable, video production unit right here. You
Absolutely.
can cut, you can shoot, you can edit, you can, publish. Everything's right there. So it's just in terms of that, there's a real opportunities now. I mean, in a sense, for people getting into it now, it's probably more difficult because it's more challenging to be seen and be heard because everyone's got access to the technology. So you really do have to be creative and just do something that sets you ahead, I suppose, in that way.
And so it's an interesting point that you make because pretty much anyone can become a content creator, and the tools that we used to use, say 20 or 30 years ago, as you say, we've got this basically in our phones. Even the editing capability, you can have something edited and out and soundtracked and titled in a matter of seconds. So obviously people tend to go down a social media, YouTube channel kind of route. Did you intentionally create something for networks? Like, did you have a goal to get something on a mainstream network?
Sure. I suppose going into television, for a lot of people, that's the end game is, getting into a job where you find your passion. And so if that's telling stories and making production, I suppose you'd like to be a director or producer of your own show. So I think that was early on, that was probably something that I was wanting to do, but then I didn't necessarily have the end game of being, at a TV network, producing. I think I think the technical term is I've got ants in my pants and I always want to do something new and something different and something exciting. And if I sit on something for too long, I tend to get a little bit bored, I suppose. So there's certain advantages to kind of running your own production because you can kind of take it in whatever direction that you want to see it. There's the sky's the limit in terms of what you can actually do. If you want to then branch out and do something else, you can do that. And, it's all just a matter of, how many hours there are in the day kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all just about how we put those hours to use. So in terms of coming up with, when you first started to create work on your own, I understand that there was a documentary that you created in 2013. And can you tell us a little bit about that and how that came about?
Yeah, well, actually, there was the first feature-length documentary I produced in 2010. And where that came from, when I went freelance, one of my big client base was working with international mission and aid organisations. So we were telling the stories of people, downtrodden people in poverty, people with disability, and that kind of thing. So for what I was doing for these clients was essentially producing small packaged 5-minute, let's say, videos telling someone's story, telling people how the organisation's responding to that. And so I really enjoyed doing this, and it's taken me all over the world. But the frustration I had in the back of my mind was, A, maybe it was that I wasn't telling the story. I was working with other producers and that kind of thing. But B, I was only telling a very short form story, and I really like to tell, delve a little bit deeper. And so that's kind of what essentially drove me to doing a feature length. It ended up being, I think, a 52-minute kind of package for TV. And so we told the long form story of something that was close to my heart, which was poverty, people with disability living in poverty.
Sure.
So we did a story that kind of paralleled an Australian story with a story of a family in a third world country. And we just looked at the parallel themes about things like community support, family support, just the everyday challenges and triumphs of someone in that situation. So that was, I mean, for me, that was immensely rewarding, because we were able to tell a long form story and, kind of make people aware of a few things that they may not have been aware of. So that project, whilst it didn't have a particular, it wasn't commissioned. It was privately made with me and another producer. And so I guess at the end of the day, we thought, oh yeah, we'd like to see it on broadcast television. But this was my first kind of pitch to try and get something on air that I'd self-produced. And in the end, we didn't get it on air. We failed in our attempts to get it through a network. So that was a little disappointing. But we ended up actually taking it to doing some cinema runs with it. So we played it. We did a big launch in Sydney, in Melbourne, and in Queensland, where one of the stories was told. And then we also took the film over to Thailand and into a jungle village where we shot the other side of the story. And we took a projector and a screen and we travelled around the village and showed different groups that. So that was just fun. I mean, that's more than anything else. Yeah, and just showing, this little village never had cinema like in the community space, and we were showing them cinema with themselves in it. So it was just quite a surreal experience for all of us.
And as much as there was obviously disappointment not selling it to a network as you'd intended, how do you think, if you did, you would have still had that experience of showing it in remote villages? And, how rewarding was that experience by contrast?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of having it on TV, that would have just probably been an ego thing for myself, I think, maybe. Essentially, I think we would have still done would have still taken it around and spruiked it in any way that we could have. Because it's one thing to create, but it's another thing to have people enjoy your creation.
Sure.
So, and so in that sense, the fact that we could attend these screenings, people sit watching the screen like this. I tended to sit looking at people and seeing their reactions to the film. I'd much rather just set up my chair up the front and look at other people in the cinema. And being able to do that, we were able to do Q&As and meet and greet and do all that kind of thing, which was just another really cool part of the process for us.
So was there a sort of a side awareness that you were trying to generate by doing this in the first place, or was it really just from a pure creative perspective?
Look, absolutely. I've always had a bit of a heart for social justice and that kind of thing. So I feel that everything I do, I want it to have a significant purpose. Some things you do might be, the significant purpose might be that you're putting food on the table and earning a few dollars.
Sure.
But essentially, my major projects and the thing that I'm spending my time on, I actually want to be able to make a difference, even if that's just in a small way. Yeah.
So if we fast forward a sort of say 5 years to the start of Snap Happy, how would you say this? Obviously you've learnt some things by not having a project picked up, even though that project, you'd poured your blood, sweat, and tears, and extremely passionate about it. How did you approach this in a slightly different way in order to try and lock that support in? Did you have to make concessions, or did you just have more experience and could approach it differently?
Yeah, look, I think the experience goes a long way. In between that documentary and getting Snap Happy off the ground, I actually I worked on a TV series about motorcycling, which ran for six seasons. And so my role in the production was shooting, editing, directing. So essentially I was working with a producer. And so with this project, we actually started a pilot was made by the time I met these guys, and then we spruiked the pilot and we got it on community television. So TVS was kind of the first place where I had my own program that was broadcast, and from there we were able to get it across to Channel 10 and Channel 7 in the end. But having said that, this wasn't I wasn't producing this show. It wasn't my own show. I mean, I was very, very involved creatively and all that. But with Snap Happy, I think that whole progression was what helped me get Snap Happy in the end off the ground, which was my production. So yeah, it was a lot of things that was learnt from that, but it was also the experience of having dealt with networks, understanding a little bit more about maybe what they want to get from you, what you can give to them. So I think it was a real combination of things.
Because I think obviously pitching it is one aspect of it, but producing it, especially for quite a few seasons, is a whole other ball game, down to the nuance of, how much you're paying for hair product. So, would you say the working experience from the motorcycle series sort of gave you that experience that you needed, even if you didn't realise it beforehand?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, going back a little way, having worked in a network, even in an entry level kind of position, a lot of people now, that they want to get into TV producing or whatever. A lot of people, because like we're talking about, the technology is so readily available, people just get out there and start making content, which is awesome. But a lot of people don't understand fundamentals and don't understand how an industry works. And I think they really struggle to connect the dots sometimes. And so I think, the whole journey for me has really helped connect those dots. And I mean, I suppose there's younger producers than me that are putting content out. And so there's different pathways to get somewhere. But in terms of my journey, I think every project that I had leading up to Snap Happy kind of did, help me connect those dots to realise what I needed to do and how to do that and, do it well.
Because, there are a lot of workings, as you say, having knowledge of how the industry works, even in a fundamental sense, because we can all create content just like we are right now. But if someone was to take some content and to try and pitch it to a network, is there some sort of key points or summary that you think, just points that they need to consider before they try and tackle that?
Sure. Yeah, look, I think firstly you need to be passionate about what you're doing. If you're not going to really give it that much of a go, I wouldn't have thought. So a passion with the subject matter is really important. Working with people that you get along with well. That's like anything. So, you can't pick your neighbours. If you've got good neighbours, then you're in a good position. But if you've got a terrible neighbour, then, home life is terrible. So
Sure.
Same thing when you're working with someone on a creative project. And particularly creatives, I suppose, can be, moody or that kind of thing. So you do want to be working with the right people. So once you've got that kind of in place, I think you've got to pitch well. I think you can't just turn up with an idea and say, I've got this really great idea. I think you need to prove to a certain degree early on that it's actually possible to do something that's entertaining or educational, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. You need to be able to demonstrate that early on. So I think a lot of people might miss the mark when they first talk to a broadcaster, and then they might not get a second chance because they don't want to hear the same pitch again. So I think that's a big part of it, is just pitching well, putting as much work into that, and keeping it simple. There's no magic bullet formula, I suppose, but for us, photography is a niche. Like, it's a very popular pastime, but it is still quite a niche, subject matter. So for us, I think, if we'd gone down a different avenue, and let's just say I wanted to produce a fishing show or a camping lifestyle show, which is very popular. And those programs at the moment, I don't know if you flicked on the telly on a Saturday or a Sunday, if you're into fishing and camping and stuff, then you're in heaven, because
there's a few around,
wall to wall, and that's great. And if that's what people are watching, that's excellent. If that's what you're passionate about and you're producing that show, then you're loving it, but that's not my passion. So in that sense, I'm doing something that's my passion, but it can be a difficult subject matter to pitch. And I've had other things kind of fall on the wayside with network pitches, because it's just a little bit too niche. So I suppose that's another consideration. If you can find your passion that fits a niche that's big enough to actually warrant, because a network wants to make money ultimately. They want you to bring an audience so that they can sell advertising, and that's how you keep a show on air, essentially. So,
of course. So do you have any tips for trying to identify sort of appetite for a particular niche? Because I mean, for the average person, we can't necessarily gauge, an audience that may be available to a network, which may be different to, say, just YouTube views or something which someone can find easily. So, do you have any tips for trying to find a niche, or at least find if your passion aligns with a particular niche that may make commercial sense?
Yeah, look, I suppose that's a tricky one, because I mean, you have to do your own research on what's popular, and even the fact that my research brought me to the conclusion that photography is actually one of the most popular pastimes, because of the amount of people that do it, whether they're doing it professionally or amateurly, or are just pulling out a phone and taking photos. It is a really popular pastime. But does that relate to advertising sales? And it's not. It's an unusual thing for the industry. When I came along wanting to do a TV series about photography, the manufacturers and the people working in the industry were a bit taken back, because they haven't done TV before. So for them, the way that they structured their finances and their budgets was to other things, not TV. So in that sense, that was a hurdle for us. And it's the same thing. Who's advertising on TV? I don't know the last time you saw a Canon or a Nikon or a Panasonic ad for photography equipment, but Sure. It doesn't really exist. It's not really a place where that industry advertises. So I think a successful pitch would be around something that you already see on TV, you already see being advertised, something that, so I mean, and that's a bit vague, I suppose, but essentially you'll get across the line. I mean, you need to have the talent to make a program that's entertaining, but if you're making a show that is getting viewers and that advertisers want to buy the ad space, then you're on a good thing. So it's just whether your passions align with what's popular and what's being advertised on networks.
I think you touched on something interesting there before as well, is that it doesn't have to be entirely unique. It just has to be a hot topic, because there is plenty of market. And say if one network is running a photography show, there's no reason why you can't go and pitch a photography show to another network, because essentially, is it because they've made the business case already, and so it becomes an easier sell rather than some sort of uncharted territory?
I think so. I mean, I think that perhaps, I think, for instance, talking on the fishing theme, I remember when ET brought out his fishing show. I think that's now 25 years old or something, 20 years old. It's been running for a long time. I think he probably had a really tough time, or his producers had a tough time getting that off the ground, I would imagine, because it wasn't something that had really been done before he started doing it. But now that there's, 2 or 3 decades of fishing shows I think that the industry, the fishing industry, has been softened towards putting money towards advertising in that kind of way, because that's where people are watching and that's where people are getting inspired. So does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's almost like a little bit of a sort of a cart and a horse scenario where you need the advertising dollars to support the shows, but the shows help drive the advertising dollars as well.
Yeah, that's right.
So speaking of advertising dollars, we are in like a business context here, and it's important, especially with a network involved, to remember that. Are there times where you've had to sort of make, not make compromises, but reassess just how much you can put into the production of these shows? Because I can tell you're passionate about it and you really want to generate the best show you possibly can, but there's still a financial side to it, and you have to be able to get a return, or at least cover your costs. Have you got some experience with that? Something you can share?
Sure. Well, my accountant's quite disappointed with me a lot because I don't think he thinks I'm making the right decisions at times. Particularly when early on, when I was working with aid organisations and perhaps businesses that might not have oodles of money for these projects and that kind of thing, but also going into my own productions, for me to go and work on someone else's show as a in a producing role or a directing role or whatever, this probably makes more financial sense in that way. So I mean, yes, there's been a lot of challenges, a lot of compromises in terms of, let's just say probably the first couple of seasons or the first couple of years of Snap Happy, I didn't really make any money on the project. So I was fairly reliant on corporate work on the side to kind of keep it going. But like with a lot of things, either, as a lot of businesses will kind of fade out quite quickly. And that could have certainly happened in this situation, but I knew that because it was a new thing in that segment of the industry, that I had to actually be a little bit more persistent. So after a couple of years, it got to the point where it's sustaining itself reasonably well, and that's kind of where I wanted to see it. Obviously, that's where I wanted to see it straight up. But
Sure.
Yes. So there was certainly compromises in terms of knowing that it was going to be a longer process to get to where we are today.
So I think it sounds very familiar to a sort of a business startup context in any industry, where sort of this ramp-in period, and a few years can go by before you not only see some money, but find out whether you actually will ever see some money. And so is there a misconception then sometimes that that just by selling an idea to a network that it's Rolls Royces and money parties?
Well, I'm yet to see the Rolls Royces or money parties, mate. So, look, I mean, everyone's situation's different. And look, I want to be careful in what I say, because I don't want to offend people that I work with. But I think you can sell your soul to a certain degree and go and work for some reality television that's immensely popular, and you might be able to roll in the cash in that. But that, for me, that's there's always two sides to everything. As I said before, it's am I getting something creatively, and do I feel like I'm doing something, some kind of service, as well as making money. So it really is a balance for me, and it also relates to the fact that I said I get frustrated and bored in certain things if I'm not creating and I'm not, in control, I suppose, for the use of a better term. I lose my marbles, so I've got to keep myself interested.
As you say, like, there is a balance there in terms of, and there are probably some ideas which are perhaps more mainstream viable than a niche idea as well, and perhaps the numbers will stack up differently as well. But in terms of being a creative and having to make decisions sometimes about, say, as you say, selling your soul, maybe not quite to that extent, but working on a project to fulfill a financial need or something like that, as opposed to doing something that you're super passionate about. How do you find that balance?
I find it just works itself out. The more passionate you are about a project that's not making money, the harder you have to work on the other stuff. So I just find that things do tend to work themselves out because, I need to have passion in my work life, but I also need money. And when you can combine those two things, it's pretty awesome. But sometimes you've got to just find that balance between maybe doing the more corporate work you might have a really busy year because you're working really passionately on a project, but then you need to also balance that with with some good paying jobs. So yeah, I find money hasn't never really been a worry. Like I was really, and I think the early days of starting out freelance, and not having that regular income, I think sets you up well for that, because the first couple of years, I'd look forward to the occasional care package where my mum would drop off a box of baked beans and undies and socks. I was never so happy to see undies and socks and,
For sure.
2-minute noodles and whatnot, because, I think in my first year of business, I think I earned, maybe 10 grand. And I was, so I had to pay the rent and everything with that money, and somehow maintain some kind of professional life.
Yeah, of course.
So I think having those days early on, you realize what you've got when things start to get a bit better. So.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's always the balance that we have. A lot of startup founders essentially kick it off as a side hustle and, to use the cool words.
Yep.
And, what's the biggest thing that you've found maybe that was unexpected as it has grown and you're not having to support it so much with the mainstream, and it's become less of a side hustle and more of the main gig?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
That's right.
Because it's all, I've worked for everything that's happened. Nothing's particularly, I always find that I've, like I said, with the finances, I always feel like I'm being provided for. Even when you come into a difficult period, I feel like I've been provided for. And personally for me, that I attribute that to my faith. As a Christian, I feel like I'm actually provided for. And that goes back to my sense of not being worried about where that next money's coming from, because I do feel that there's a provision there. And I suppose as an example of that is, when lockdown began and everyone went into isolation, my industry pretty much shut down, and all my colleagues are all out of work, and any projects they were working on it stopped. Like SnapHappy had. So we and fortunately for me at the time, in that first week, I lost multiple big jobs and that kind of thing. But by the end of that first week, I was picking up all this work, a lot of it to do with communications of COVID-19, internal communications and that kind of thing with organisations, and even to the point where now I'm doing weekly church services for the cathedral in Sydney. And this was an unexpected one, I even did the broadcast for Channel 9 for their Easter service. So
wow.
That was totally unexpected. I was not planning on doing that, but that's just how these things sometimes work out. So so in that sense, so there are things that surprise you, and having that now, that's a regular weekly gig now that I'm doing, producing kind of online content for the cathedral, but that's kind of filled in the gaps for me in a lot of ways. So just planning now when's the best time to start production again for SnapHappy, and that's what we're kind of working towards at the moment.
And so how disruptive do you think that this could be for network TV, where there are planned schedules and that sort of thing? We've already seen some reality TV shows where they basically wrapped up early the season because they literally couldn't film the rest of it. What sort of consequences are we going to see for this, do you think?
Yeah, well, look, I think a big one, particularly in my situation, but with a lot of people, is just the travel and just moving about. We always have an international element to our programming, so I don't know how long it's going to be until we can travel again, and even just traveling interstate and that kind of thing. At the moment, that's not possible as well. It's this is why we're distant, because
Of course, yeah.
we can't get crews together to work on stuff. You can, but it's very difficult.
Sure.
So in that sense, it's really disruptive. As to the extent of how disruptive it is in terms of what's going to happen with TV content in over the next few months, when producers aren't giving content to the networks, that'll be interesting, and we might be seeing more reruns of Gilligan's Island or something. I don't know.
Just what the universe needs.
Yeah, exactly. So look, but I think the travel one is a big disruption, and even to the point where with airlines struggling and going into receivership and things like that, is travel going to go up significantly? Because that could really hurt us, because we travel for everything. We shoot very little in Sydney. We shoot all over Australia and all over the world. So if let's just say travel went up by 20%, that's really going to hurt our budgets.
Sure.
So I think that'll reflect on a lot of production.
Do you think that we may see more competition from sort of newcomers or things like that? Because, with COVID, the interesting thing that we've seen is that the veil's sort of been lifted on that polished presentation of media that we sort of become accustomed to. And, news reports are being done from garages, and it's really changed the dynamic and the visuals that are coming across network TV. Do you think that might carry through and there might be a bit of a legacy there long term?
I think so. I think a lot of people are rethinking about how they do their communication, because everyone's had to adapt. How much would you love to be the Zoom CEO right now? He's been sitting in a gold mine. He didn't realise it. But it's the same thing. I kind of wonder whether a lot of organisations will start to do a lot of their own internal communications, people working from home, being out and communicating through the digital kind of form. I've been saying from early on, the beginning of this, we're going to see a whole lot of new generation of vloggers and YouTube stars, because people are got this new passion now. Look, I'm making content now, and I think they'll keep it up after this. When we go back to normality, I think a lot of people will keep that up, and I think we'll see a lot more digital media in that sense.
Do you think there's a few lessons to be learned from the bloggers in terms of, the vloggers in terms of like lean production values? And some of these guys are creating some pretty top-notch content with nothing more than amateur gear and a bit of creativity and some free time. Do you think there's some things we can learn from those guys?
Yeah, I think so. It's all it's very interesting. I think people want to see genuine content, and I think even high-end agencies and whatnot that are marketing, often they will unpolish things that are going out so that it appears more genuine. And so I think people, in that sense, there's definitely a way of communicating, and communicating on a budget that speaks in genuine ways. Then obviously, having said that, there needs to be some real fundamentals. If we can't see you, if we can't hear you, then forget about it. But if you've got clear audio, clear vision, and you're creative or entertaining or whatever, then there's no reason why that communication isn't valid. And I think, there's lots we can learn from that. I just shot a whole series of whole series of videos on an iPhone. That was what I was commissioned to do, is to shoot this series on an iPhone, and putting that content out online, you wouldn't know that it was an iPhone.
No.
9 times out of 10, it's amazing.
I think that's the thing, the way people are digesting content is different, and even watching mainstream media via Facebook or a YouTube live feed. I think most of us have watched recent premiere updates and things. Half the time it's through a YouTube live feed or whatever anyway, and as you say, maybe you wouldn't even know if it was on an iPhone, and it just makes makes life a little bit easier. So we're coming up on time, but I've got a few quick questions that I would love to ask you.
Sure.
And the answers can be as in-depth or as concise as you like.
Sure.
But we'll give it a red-hot shot. So in your business journey, what's the single most important thing that you've learnt? Absolute single thing.
Single most important thing. Okay, you ask me now, I might say something. If you ask me tomorrow, I might say something else.
That's all right.
But I think the single most important thing is, I've already said, is working with people that you like, people that you're compatible with. Because I've worked with people that I'm compatible with, and I've worked with people that I'm not compatible with, and it's total polar opposite to, living a happy life, essentially. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, we definitely spend a lot of time with the people that we work with, and I think that's definitely strong on the consideration list. So if you had your time again, is there a decision that you made which you might change in order to change the outcomes that you've had?
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't think so. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of mistakes that I've made, but I think that everything that I've done has given me something and let me grow or learn something. And it's the old classic, you learn from your mistakes. You absolutely do. Sometimes it's good to learn from other people's mistakes. So I like to hear other people's stories and that kind of thing. But yeah, no, I wouldn't change anything.
Sounds good. And I think we all like to hear from other people's, successes and failures, which is exactly what we're doing right now. Last question is, who is one person in the world, dead or alive, that you'd love to have lunch with?
Oh, okay.
can be for business or personal reasons.
Business or personal? Oh, look, I think I would just go with someone really random and say someone like Bill Murray, just because I think he'd be really funny, and he would just have so many stories, and because I'm not the world's biggest fan of him, I don't think I'd fanboy out. I think I'd be able to have a good conversation. So I don't think I want to meet my absolute heroes, because I don't know. I think I'm probably going to be a bit too awkward, I think.
And you probably have a great lunch and a good laugh along the way, right?
Absolutely.
Sounds like a good plan. All right. So what are you working on at the moment in terms of, I know things are on pause a little bit right now, but presuming it all goes back to normal fairly soon, what's coming up for you next?
Well, we're actually, at the moment, we're developing a 1-hour online special for Snap Happy, which, as soon as we can resume some travel interstate, I'm going to go and meet up with one of our presenters. And we're going to go somewhere like Fraser Island, or a good location for photography, and we're going to do a 1-hour special, including some tips for how to stay creative in isolation and things like that. So that's what we're working on at the moment, and that's just essentially for us, is just a way that we can keep some content coming out for our fans that won't see us otherwise this year, and then we'll resume for our next season for 2021.
Awesome.
21, yeah.
But for those of you who would, those watching who would love to check you out, where do they find you?
SnapHappyTV.com. You can find everything about Snap Happy, or worldviewproductions.com.au. You can find a little bit more about what we do.
Fantastic. Tim Robertson, I've really enjoyed this chat and your insight into media, and thanks so much for being a part of it.
No, thank you, Rob. It's been awesome.
Thank you. There you have it. I hope you really enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please like it, share it, or leave us a review on your favourite platform. It helps us show more of this content to people just like you.